Okay, welcome to the Closer Reading channel. We're gonna start reading Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. Section 1, Latitudes and Departures. Chapter 1. Snowballs have flown their arcs, starred the sides of outbuildings, as of cousins, carried hats away into the brisk wind off Delaware. The sleds are brought in, and their runners carefully dried and greased, shoes deposited in the back hall, a stocking-footed descent made upon the great kitchen, in a purposeful dither since morning, punctuated by the ringing lids of various boilers and stewing pots, fragrant with pie spices, peeled fruits, suet, heated sugar, the children having all upon the fly, among rhythmic slaps of batter and spoon, coaxed and stolen what they might, proceed as upon each afternoon, all this snowy advent, to a comfortable room at the rear of the house, years since given over to their carefree assaults. Here have come to rest a long scarred sawbuck table with two mismatched side benches, from the Lancaster County branch of the family, some Second Street Chippendale, including an interpretation of the famed Chinese sofa, with a high canopy of yards of purple stuff that might be drawn all round to make a snug, dim tent. A few odd chairs sent from England before the war, mostly pine and cherry about, nor much mahogany, excepting a sinister and wonderful card table, which exhibits the cheaper wave-like grain known in the trade as wandering heart, causing an illusion of depth into which for years children have gazed as into the illustrated pages of books, along with so many hinges, sliding mortises, hidden catches, and secret compartments that neither the twins nor their sister can say they have been to the end of it. Upon the wall, banished to this den of parlor apes for its remembrance of a time better forgotten, reflecting most of the room, the carpet and drapes a little frayed, Whiskers the cat stalking beneath the furniture, looking out with eyes finely reflexive to anything suggesting food, hangs a mirror in an inscribed frame, commemorating the Miss Gianza, that memorable farewell ball staged in 77 by the British who'd been occupying the city, just before their withdrawal from Philadelphia. This Christmastide of 1786, with the war settled and the nation bickering itself back into fragments, wounds bodily and ghostly, great and small, go aching on. Not everyone commemorated, nor too often even recounted. Snow lies upon all Philadelphia, from river to river, whose further shores have so vanished behind curtains of ice fog that the city today might be an isle upon an ocean. Ponds and creeks are frozen over, and the trees aglare to the last slightest twig, nerve lines of concentrated light. Hammers and saws have fallen still, bricks lie in snow-covered heaps, city sparrows in speckled outbursts. Hop in and out of what shelter there may be. The nightward sky, clouds blown to chalk smears, stretches above the northern liberties, Spring Garden and Germantown. Its early moon, pale as snowdrifts. Smoke ascends from chimney pots. Sledding parties adjourn indoors. Taverns bustle. Freshly infused coffee flows every place, borne about through rooms front and back, whilst Madeira, which has ever fueled association in these parts, is deployed nowadays like an ancient elixir upon the seething pot of politics. For the times are as impossible to calculate this advent as the distance to a star. It has become an afternoon habit for the twins and their sister, and what friends, old and young, may find their way here, to gather for another tale from their far-traveled uncle, the Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, who arrived back in October for the funeral of a friend of years ago, too late for the burial, as it proved, and has lingered as a guest in the house of his sister Elizabeth, the wife, for many years, of Mr. J. Wade LeSpark, a respected merchant active in town affairs. Whilst in his home, yet sultan enough to convey to the Reverend, though without ever so stipulating, that for as long as he can keep the children amused, he may remain. Too much evidence of juvenile rampage at the wrong moment, however, and Buppo, 'twill be out the door with him, where waits the winter's block and blade. Thus, they have heard the escape from Hottentot land, the accursed ruby of Mogok, the shipwrecks in Indies, east and west. An herodotic web of adventures and curiosity selected the Reverend implies for their moral usefulness, whilst avoiding others not as suitable in the hearing of youth. The youth, as usual, not being consulted in this. Tenebrae has seated herself and taken up her needlework, a piece whose size and difficulty are already subjects of discussion in the house. The embroideress herself keeping silence upon this topic at least. Announced by nasal telegraph, in come the twins, bearing the old pewter coffee machine, venting its puffs of vapor, and a large basket dedicated to saccharomanic appetites, piled to the brim with fresh fried donuts, rolled in sugar, glazed chestnuts, buns, fritters, crullers, tarts. What is this? Why, lads, you've read my mind. The coffee's for you, Nug. The last time you were talking in your sleep, the pair exclaimed, placing the sweets nearer themselves. All in this room being left to seize and pour as they may. As none could agree which had been born first, the twins were named Pitt and Pliny, so that they might be termed the elder or the younger, as might day-to-day please one or annoy his brother. Why haven't we heard a tale about America? Pitt licking gobbets of Philadelphia pudding from his best jabbet, with Indians in it, and Frenchmen, adds Pliny, whose least gesture sends cookie crumbs everywhere. French women come to that, mutters Pitt. It's not easy being pious for both of us, you know, Pliny advises. It's 20 years, recalls the Rev, since we all topped the Allegheny Ridge together and stood looking out at the Ohio country. So fair, a revelation, meadowed to the horizon. Mason and Dixon and all the McLeans, Darby and Cope. No, Darby wouldn't have been there in 66. Howbeit, old Mr. Barnes and young Tom Hines, the rascal. Don't know where they all went. Some fought in the war. Some chose peace, come what might. Some profited. Some lost everything. Some are gone to Kentucky, and some, as now poor Mason, to dust. 'Twas not too many years before the war. What we were doing out in that country together was brave, scientific beyond my understanding, and ultimately meaningless. We were putting a line straight through the heart of the wilderness, 8 yards wide and due west, in order to separate two proprietorships granted when the world was yet feudal, and but 8 years later to be nullified by the War for Independence. And now Mason's gone, and the Reverend Cherrycoke, who came to town only to pay his respects, has lingered through the first descent of cold, the first drawings in to the hearthside, the first harvest season meals, appearing upon the next best dishes. He had intended to be gone weeks ago, but finds he cannot detach. Each day among his devoirs is a visit, however brief, to Mason's grave. The verger has taken to nodding at him. In the middle of the night recently he awoke convinced that 'twas he who had been haunting Mason, that like a shade with a grievance he expected Mason, but newly arrived at death, to help him with something. After years wasted, the Reverend commences, at perfecting a parsonical disguise, grown old in the service of an impersonation that never took more than a handful of actors' tricks, past remembering those yearnings for danger, past all that ought to have been, but never had a hope of becoming, have I beached upon these Republican shores, stoven, dismasted, imbecile with age, an untrusty remembrancer, for whom the few events yet rattling within a broken memory must provide the only comfort now remaining to him. Uncle, Tenebrae pretends to gasp. But this morning you look so much younger. Why, I had no idea. Kindly, Bray. That is from my secret revelation, of course. Don't know that I'd phrase it quite like that in the present company. Then, Tenebrae replying to her uncle's twinkling with the usual play of eyelashes. It begins with a hanging. Excellent, cry the twins. The Rev, producing a scarred old notebook, covered in cheap leather, begins to read. Had I been the first churchman of modern times to be swung from the Tyburn tree, had I been then taken for dead, whilst in fact but spending an intermission upon the eventless corridors of syncope, due to the final bowl of ale, had a riotous throng of medical students taken what they deemed to be my cadaver back beneath the somber groins of their college, had I then been resurrected into an entirely new knowledge of the terms of being in which our Savior, strange to say, in what era of Wesley and Whitefield, though present, would not have figured as preeminently as with most sectarians, howbeit, I should closely resemble the nomadic parson you behold today. Mother said you're the family outcast, Pitt remarks. They pay you money to keep you away, says Pliny. Your grandsire, Cherrycoke, lads, has ever kept his promise to remit to me, by way of certain chartered companies, a sum precise to the farthing, as punctual as the moon, to any address in the world, save one in Britain. Britain is his world, and he will persist even now in standing shamed before it for certain crimes of my distant youth. Crimes! Exclaimed the boys together. Why, so did wicked men declare 'em. Before God, another tale. What'd they nail you on? Uncle Ives wishes to know. Strictly professional interest, of course. Green brief bag over one shoulder, but lately returned from a coffee house meeting. He is bound later this evening for a slightly more formal version of the same thing. The feeling here with the children, much as might a coaching passenger left off at nightfall among an unknown populace, to wait for a connecting coach, alone, pedestrian, desiring to pass the time to some revenue, if not profit. Along with some lesser counts, the Reverend is replying. 'Twas one of the least tolerable offenses in that era, the worst Dick Turpin, seeming but the carelessness of youth beside it, the crime they styled anonymity. That is, I left messages posted publicly, but did not sign them. I knew some night-running lads in the district who let me use their printing press. Somehow, I got into printing up were accounts of certain crimes I had observed, committed by the stronger against the weaker, enclosures, evictions, assize verdicts, activities of the military, giving the names of as many of the perpetrators as I was sure of, yet keeping back what I foolishly imagined my own, till the night I was tipped and brought in to London in chains and clapped in the Tower. The Tower! Oh, do not tease them so, Tenebrae praised him. Ludgate, then, whichever, 'twas gall. It took me till I was lying among the rats and vermin, upon the freezing edge of a future invisible, to understand that my name had never been my own, rather belonging all this time to the authorities, who forbade me to change it or withhold it, as 'twere a ring upon the collar of a beast, ever waiting for the lead to be fastened on. One of those moments Hindus and Chinamen are said to be having, entire loss of self, perfect union with all, sort of thing. Strange lights, fires, voices indecipherable. Indeed, children, this is the part of the tale where your old uncle gets to go insane. Or so then, each in his interest, did it please everyone to style me. Sea voyages in those days being the standard treatment for insanity. My exile should commence for the best of medical reasons. Though my inclination had been to go out aboard an East Indiaman, the Reverend continues, as the route east traversed notoriously a lively and youthful world of shipboard dalliance, gale force assemblies, and duels ashore, with the French fleet a constant, for some romantic danger, like pirates yet more polite, as the ladies often assured me. Alas, those who controlled my fate, getting wind of my preference at the last moment, swiftly arranged to have me transferred into a small British frigate, sailing alone upon a long voyage in a time of war. The Seahorse, 24 guns, Captain Smith. I hastened into Leadenhall Street to inquire. Can this be objection we hear? I was greeted. Are you saying that a sixth rate is beneath you? Would you prefer to remain ashore and take up quarters in Bedlam? It has made a man of many in your situation. Some have come to enjoy fairly meaningful lives there. Or if it's some need for the exotic, we might arrange for a stay in one of the French hospitals. Would one of my condition even know how to object, my lord? I owe you everything. Madness has not impaired your memory. Good. Keep away from harmful substances, in particular coffee, tobacco, and Indian hemp. If you must use the latter, do not inhale. Keep your memory working, young man. Have a safe voyage. So with this, no doubt, well-meant advice, finding its way into the mid-watch sounds of waves past my sleeping place, I set sail upon an engine of destruction, in the hope that eastward yet might dwell something of peace and Godhead, which British civilization in venturing westward had left behind. And thus was consternation the least of my feelings when, instead of supernatural guidance from llamas old as time, here came Jean Crapaud looming, 34 guns worth of disaster, and only one lesson.